Hello YouTube, welcome back. Today it is tRicK MiRRor number 6, I believe. I've been watching so many TikToks and I might start making TikToks. Let me know down below what you think of that idea. I just am not really sure what kind of content I'd want to make on there, but it's so fun. I just finished reading this essay last night. It was so good though, like, oh my god, this might be my favorite one so far. It's called The Story of a Generation in 7 Scams. So I mentioned last week that it is about the Fire Festival, and it does start out there, but I hadn't finished the essay completely, so that's why I didn't know that it was also about 6 other scams. There's so much scamming going on in this essay. Okay, so it starts out with the Fire Festival, which I feel like most of you probably already know what that is. There was a Hulu and Netflix documentary about it, and a bunch of people covered it on YouTube and in the news. Basically, this guy, Billy McFarland, started this music festival that was supposed to take place out in the Bahamas and planned it on a very tight timeline, and it was a disaster, and people flew out there and paid so much money, like thousands of dollars sometimes, and were just put up in these like tents, and it was really bad. I'll put some links down below about it. So it starts out there, and then it goes on to this section called The Crash, which is about the housing bubble that happened in the early thousands. And then, oh my god, she covers this concept of the confidence man, which is I didn't know this, but that's the extended version of con man. And so she explains like the origin of that phrase. So this is page 165. She writes, "Real con men don't have to ask you for your watch or your confidence. They act in such a way that you feel lucky to give it to them, eager to place a sure bet on a horse race or park your money in an impossibly successful investment fund, eager to fly to the Bahamas for a party that doesn't exist." Whew, savage. Ooh, okay, and then on page 167 she writes, "The con is in the DNA of this country, which was founded on the idea that it is good, important, and even noble to see an opportunity to profit and take whatever you can. Both the con man and his target want to take advantage of a situation. The difference between them is that the con man succeeds." Okay, and then, oh my god, and then the next section is about the student debt disaster, which student debt is the #1 debt of our generation. And she literally goes through just how not worth it college is for the price that it is, and how financial aid really does not do enough still. Like, we knew this, but like when it's like written here with all the numbers, it's oh my god. And then she connects it to like how this is so sad. This just makes me so sad for us. On page 169 she writes, "In 2005, 30% of American workers were contingent workers, contract employees or part-time employees or self-employed. Now the number is 40% and rising." And then, okay. "In the years following the recession, I kept hearing the little factoid that people my age would change careers an average of 4 times in our first decade out of college. Stories about how millennials prefer to freelance still abound. The desired takeaway seems to be, millennials are free spirits, we're flexible, we'll work anywhere with a ping pong table, we are up for anything and ready to connect. But a generation doesn't start living a definitively mercurial work trajectory for reasons of personality. It's just easier, as Malcolm Harris argues in his book Kids These Days, to think millennials float from gig to gig because we're shiftless or spoiled or in love with the hustle, than to consider the fact that the labor market, for people of every generation, is punitively unstable and growing more so every day. That hurts. That one hurts. Okay, and then the next scam is the social media scam, which naturally goes into the rise of Facebook. Oh my god, this is a good point. Okay, so on page 172 she writes, "Back then it seemed that we were all using some new wonderful product. Now, more than a decade later, it has become an axiom that we, the users, are the product ourselves." Even if Zuckerberg didn't set out to consciously scam the people who signed up for Facebook, everyone who signed up, all 2.25 billion monthly users and counting, has been had nonetheless. Page 174, at a basic level, Facebook, like most other forms of social media, runs on doublespeak, advertising connection but creating isolation, promising happiness but inculcating dread. Our social potential is compressed to our ability to command public attention, which is then made inextricable from economic survival. Instead of fair wages and benefits, we have our personalities and stories and relationships, and we'd better learn to package them well for the internet in case we ever get in an accident while uninsured. Okay, and then the next one is called The Girl Bosses, which is funny. I actually watched Girl Boss on Netflix a couple years back, and I kind of liked it. I feel like now if I watched it, I'd just see it so differently, because well, she goes into the founding of Nasty Gal by Sophia Amoruso, who said, "I entered adulthood believing that capitalism was a scam, but I've instead found that it's a kind of alchemy," Amoruso writes. And then Gia writes, "Scams, of course, are also a kind of alchemy, spinning horse shit into gold." Ooh, okay, on page 178, after a scathing critique of Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, Gia writes, "A politics built around getting and spending money is sexier than a politics built around politics." On page 179, on the wings of market-friendly feminism, the idea that personal advancement is a subversive form of political progress has been accepted as gospel. The trickiest thing about this idea is that it is incomplete and insufficient without being entirely wrong. The feminist scammer rarely sets out to scam anyone, and would argue, certainly, that she does not belong in this category. She just wants to be successful, to gain the agency that men claim so easily, to have the sort of life she wants. She should be able to have that, shouldn't she? The problem is that a feminism that prioritizes the individual will always, at its core, be at odds with a feminism that prioritizes the collective. So then the next section is called The Really Obvious Ones. Oh, okay, and this is a section that is kind of like a combination of all different sorts of examples. It's basically about like really obvious scams. So first she writes about the raw water trend, and then goes into this like juice company called Juicero that sold these like really expensive juicing machines that Bloomberg wrote an expose on because they didn't work any better than like juicing by hand. Ooh, there's also this chocolate brand that advertised themselves to be like a bean to bar chocolatier, except that they just remelted chocolate and then put it in fancy wrapping paper. And then she writes out all the people who like made fun of them for it online, except that apparently making fun of scammers is like a whole like part of it. Okay, this is page 182. Stories about blatant con artists allow us to have the scam both ways. We get the pleasure of seeing the scammer exposed and humiliated, but also the retrospective, vicarious thrill of watching the scammer take people for a ride. Ooh, and then the story of Theranos, which is very infamous at this point. There was a book called Bad Blood that came out about it. Elizabeth Holmes basically started this company that advertised that they had this blood testing technology, and they like built this huge company on it, but turns out the technology just never existed. So Gia ends that part with, "The absurd length of time that it took for Holmes to be exposed illuminates a grim, definitive truth of our era. Scammers are always safest at the top." So then the next section is called The Disruptors, and it's about Amazon. Did you know that Amazon's original name was going to be called Relentless? I had no idea. Amazon started out as a book-selling business that would sell books online, but now it sells everything. On page 187, Gia writes, "The model of business success in the millennial era is that of dismantling social structures to suck up cash from whatever corners of life can still be exploited." And then she starts writing about Uber and Airbnb. It's so interesting to read about it in this way, because for most of like my adult life, like Uber and Airbnb were just like these like cool innovations that made rides cheaper and housing cheaper. And it's like pretty appalling just how much they get away with. Like they're legit out here breaking laws and like no one cares because they're big enough and can like pay off the right people. I'm not really sure how this works. Okay, yeah, this sums it up pretty well. On page 189, Gia writes, "What bothers me most about this situation is the idea that our cut out the middleman era has somehow made everyone more equal, that a lack of technological barriers and a surplus of hustle have ushered in a fairer world. But venture capital is social capital, doled out according to networks and affinity and comfort. 76% of venture capital partners are white men. Until now, only white men have been able to boldly stride forward the way Amazon and Uber did, on a business model of sidestepping regulations, cutting out protections, shoving off liability, and siphoning as much money as possible away from the people who physically do the work. Whenever this changes, whenever women and minorities are allowed to be their own Bezos, it will hardly be a victory for anyone at all." I honestly felt like she could end the essay there, but it gets worse. The last section is called "The Election," and it writes extensively about the 2016 presidential election and President Trump's scamming of the United States. Alright, so the first thing I highlighted here was on page 192, where she writes, "Here, one of the most soul-crushing things about the Trump era reveals itself. To get through it with any psychological stability, to get through it without routinely descending into an emotional abyss, a person's best strategy is to think mostly of himself, herself. As wealth continues to flow upward, as Americans are increasingly shut out of their own democracy," oh my god, watch my USPS video if you want more on how our democracy is being threatened right now. "As political action is constrained into online spectacle, I have felt so many times that the choice of this era is to be destroyed or to morally compromise ourselves in order to be functional, to be wrecked, or to be functional for reasons that contribute to the wreck." That's literally it. That's the summary of our entire generation. Here we go, 194. "People are so busy just trying to get back to zero, or trying to build up a buffer against disaster, or trying to enjoy themselves because there's so little else to count on. Three endeavors that could contain the vast majority of human effort until our depleted planet finally ends it all." So that is where I'll end at. Yeah, so it's a very bleak, sad ending. However, that's why I love this essay so much. Is that the only positive I can think of, that I love this essay because of how gut-wrenching it was? I literally have all the TikTok songs stuck in my head. Okay, as always, I'd love to hear what you thought about this week's essay down below. And if you get a chance to read next week's essay, also let me know any questions or comments you have on it down below, or in the Goodreads discussion page, which I will also link down below. I've only read the first few pages of next week's essay, but I believe it is about like Greek life on college campuses, so that will definitely be an interesting one to read. And yeah, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time. Bye!